He told himself it wasn't his fault. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't known what would happen. He'd followed procedure. Still, the guilt sat heavy in his chest. The summons came in a plain white envelope, the kind most people try to ignore. Jury duty, mandatory, civic responsibility. The man who received it, his name doesn't matter, almost threw it away. He worked long hours, lived alone, kept to himself. The idea of sitting in a courtroom for days, listening to strangers argue about a crime that had nothing to do with him, felt like a waste of time, but he went anyway. The courthouse was old, cold, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. Dozens of people sat in plastic chairs, scrolling their phones, whispering, sighing. When his group was called, they were led into a courtroom and told they'd been selected for a murder trial. That word changed the air instantly. Murder. The judge explained the basics. A young woman had been found dead in a wooded area just outside the city. The accused was a man in his late 30s. No prior convictions. Pleaded not guilty. As the jurors were asked the standard questions about bias, prior knowledge, personal experiences with violence, the man answered honestly. He had never served on a jury before. He didn't know the defendant. He didn't recognize the case, at least not yet. The prosecution began with photographs, not the gruesome kind, just a single image projected onto a screen, a driver's license photo of the victim. The moment the man saw her face, his stomach tightened. He didn't gasp. He didn't react outwardly at all. But something inside him shifted, like a memory snapping into place. He recognized her. Her name was read aloud. Her age, 26, social worker, recently moved back to the area. The man stared at the image longer than anyone else in the room. Pale face, tired eyes, a faint scar near her left eyebrow. He knew that scar. Years ago, he'd seen it up close. Back then, she had been sitting across from him in a cramped office, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying not to cry. The memory came back in fragments at first. A different building, fluorescent lights, a cheap desk separating them. She had come to him asking for help. Not in a dramatic way, not begging, just exhausted, afraid. She told him she was scared of someone she lived with, that things were escalating, that she didn't feel safe going home. He remembered how he'd listened, how he'd nodded, how he'd glanced at the clock. There hadn't been enough evidence. No visible injuries, no police report. No witnesses. He'd explained the process, the limitations, the next steps. He'd told her she could file a report. He'd told her shelters were often full. He'd told her to come back if things got worse. She had asked one last question before leaving. What if I don't get another chance? He hadn't answered. Now she was dead. The trial continued. Witnesses spoke. Detectives described the crime scene. The body had been found partially buried, wrapped in a tarp. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. The defendant sat quietly, expression unreadable. The man on the jury tried to focus, but the past kept bleeding into the present. He remembered the way the woman's voice had shaken, The way she kept looking at the door, like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. He hadn't thought about her in years. He told himself it wasn't his fault. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't known what would happen. He'd followed procedure. Still, the guilt sat heavy in his chest. Then the defendant testified. He spoke calmly, confidently. He admitted knowing the victim, admitted they'd lived together for a short time, claimed she'd left on her own after an argument, said he had nothing to do with her death. As he spoke, his eyes moved slowly across the jury. When they reached the man, they stopped, just for a second. But it was long enough. That night, the man barely slept. He dreamed of the office again, the woman sitting across from him, except this time her face was bruised, her eyes hollow. "You said to come back," she whispered. "I didn't make it." The next day, something changed. During cross-examination, the prosecution brought up a series of police reports, calls made by the victim in the months before her death, complaints, requests for welfare checks, reports of fear. None of them had gone anywhere. Then the prosecutor mentioned something that made the man's blood run cold. One report, filed just weeks before the murder, mentioned a third party. Someone the victim believed was also involved. Someone she thought was allowing it to happen. The report had been dismissed as paranoia. The man felt the courtroom closing in around him. During a break, as the jurors filed out, the defendant leaned back in his chair and spoke quietly. "She tried really hard, you know." The guard didn't hear him. No one reacted, but the man did. Later, the man asked to speak privately with the judge. He said he might recognize the victim from his professional life, that he was worried it could affect his impartiality. The judge listened, asked questions, then shook his head. "You followed protocol at the time," the judge said. "That doesn't disqualify you." The man returned to the jury box, feeling trapped. The final day of the trial came quickly. Closing arguments were delivered. The jury was sent to deliberate. They talked for hours. Evidence, timelines, reasonable doubt. The man listened, contributed when asked, but said little. His mind kept returning to the defendant's eyes, the way they'd lingered on him. Eventually, a verdict was reached. Guilty. The defendant showed no emotion as he was led away, but as he passed the jury, he turned his head slightly and smiled. Weeks later, after the trial was over and life had returned to something like normal, the man received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, a photocopy of an old intake form. The woman's name was at the top. Below it, written in shaky handwriting, was a note she had added herself after the man had left the room. "If something happens to me," it read, "please don't let them say no one knew." At the bottom was a date. The day she had come to him for help. And beneath that, in a different handwriting, just 4 words. "You were on the list." The man never reported the letter. There was no point, no evidence, no crime. But from that day on, every time there was a knock at his door, every time he heard footsteps behind him, he wondered the same thing. Whether the defendant had been the only one on trial, or whether the woman, in her final act, had made sure the jury included everyone she believed was responsible. And if the woman was right, if she truly was keeping a list, then the most terrifying question isn't whether justice was served. It's this: if you were called to sit on that jury, would you be there to judge, or because it was finally your turn to be judged?